I'm Nima Rajan. We begin tonight's cast with a look at the escalating tensions in Eastern Europe as the international community reacts to a potential war brewing between Russia and Ukraine. Global Affairs says it is temporarily pulling the children of Canadian embassy staff and family members accompanying them from Ukraine. This in response to the Russian military buildup on the country's borders. The UK has pulled out some diplomats, while the US has ordered families of personnel to leave. Global Affairs says it will continue to closely monitor the situation, while Russia has denied it is planning an assault. But it has massed an estimated 100,000 troops near Ukraine in recent weeks. Meanwhile, the federal government isn't saying who is behind a January 19th cyber attack against Global Affairs Canada. The attack has left some diplomats without access to some online services almost a week later. It happened just one day before the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity urged companies to take stronger measures to protect themselves against the potential for Russian-backed attacks. Turning to the COVID-19 pandemic, which contributed to an average 7-month decline in Canada's national life expectancy. That is the largest decrease since the data started to be recorded in 1921. Statistics Canada says preliminary data shows national life expectancy was 81.7 years for those born in 2020. This is down from age 82.3 the year before. The drop was greater for men at more than 8 months than for women at nearly 5 months. And the largest declines in the country were observed in the 6 provinces from Quebec west to BC. Meanwhile, a $4.2 million fundraising account for an anti-vaccine mandate convoy of truckers crossing the country is causing confusion. According to the Canadian press, GoFundMe says it has frozen the account by organizers of the convoy until it receives documentation about distribution of the cash. However, there is confusion after the website of what's known as the Freedom Convoy continues to be active and raising money. The convoy is heading from BC to Ottawa. The secretary of the Western Separatist Maverick Party launched the GoFundMe page, which states the money will go to accommodation, food, and fuel for big riggers. The drivers are protesting a new rule that Canadian truckers be fully vaccinated. This if they want to avoid a 14-day quarantine when they cross the border from the United States. Groups representing Canada's paramedics are calling for improved mental health services. Dave Dinas, president of the Paramedic Association of Canada, says ambulance paramedic services countrywide are reporting more calls and fewer staff. This is because of the 92-year-old, or rather nearly 2-year-old COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing drug overdose crisis. He adds extreme weather events have highlighted the need for more staff and better mental health supports for first responders. A new survey suggests rebates on carbon taxes haven't helped Canadians warm up to them. A survey is published this week in the journal Nature Climate Change. It says returning money to taxpayers to offset or even exceed the amount they had paid in carbon taxes didn't make much difference to public opinion about them. The survey, which took place over 2019 and 2020, also found Canadians don't understand the rebates very well. And those convinced that they were paying more in carbon taxes than they got back remained just as convinced even when they were shown the facts. When the researchers did similar surveys in Switzerland, which also has carbon rebates, they got similar results. The Parliamentary Budget Officer is predicting the cost of cleaning up orphaned oil and gas wells in Alberta and Saskatchewan will exceed expectations. Yves Giroux says it will top $1 billion by 2025. That's far higher than the $237 million in security deposits that the federal government has collected to pay for the job. Orphan wells are oil and gas wells abandoned by bankrupt companies. And it was another volatile day on North American stock markets. Stocks fell again on Tuesday. The S&P 500 fell 1.3%. This moves it closer to a correction, which is considered to be a drop of 10% from a peak. The S&P 500's most recent record high was on January 3rd. Investors are concerned by upcoming central bank decisions and the possibility of war in Ukraine. All right, we'll be right back after the break with a deeper look at the situation in Ukraine. Ukrainian officials say war with Russia is not imminent, but they do say that the threat is real. This while Canada is now withdrawing families of embassy personnel from the country. all while NATO and Russia continue to bolster their differences in the region. With all that going on, up next, we have an interview with security and defense expert Dr. Christian Leuprecht up next. So stay with us. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News after a short break. We'll see you soon. Ukraine's leaders are seeking to reassure the nation that a feared invasion from neighboring Russia is not imminent. Those comments came today, even as Ukrainian leaders acknowledge that the threat is real, and as they prepared to accept a shipment of American military equipment to shore up their defenses. Russia has denied that it is planning an assault, but it has massed an estimated 100,000 troops near Ukraine in recent weeks. This led the U.S. and its NATO allies to prepare for a possible war. NATO is bolstering its deterrence in the Baltic Sea region, and the U.S. ordered 8,500 troops on higher alert. With us to unpack the situation is Dr. Christian Leuprecht, who is, among other things, a security and defense expert. He is also a professor at the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University. Dr. Leuprecht, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hello, Nima. My pleasure.
So lots happening in Eastern Europe right now, Doctor. Give our viewers a quick update on the current military situation on the ground along the Ukraine and Russian border.
Yeah, so everybody will have heard of the Russian buildup. What's important is the type of buildup. So Russia has amassed about 60 battle groups. So that is a considerable amount of firepower. But what we don't currently see is columns. That is to say, lining up, moving out, for instance, of the garrisons. We don't see reservists being called up. We're still missing the field hospitals. We would expect to see significant sort of supply chains being stood up. When the Ukrainian government says that an invasion does not appear imminent, it's either that the Russians are not at the point where they feel they can operationalize this, or that they're planning for a very quick campaign that ultimately doesn't require those elements.
And considering that both Ukraine and Boris Johnson yesterday said that this attack is not imminent, why are all sides in this shoring up their forces if there is no imminent threat in the first place?
Well, one of the concerns is that Russia is trying to stage a counter-revolution in Kiev, and that it's keeping its forces essentially in reserve. So that it's using its intelligence operatives that are already embedded across Ukrainian institutions, essentially to install a government that is favorable to Russia. So that would mean a conflict, but it wouldn't mean a war. But it does mean that tensions remain high, and anytime the territorial integrity, the political stability, the economic prosperity, or social harmony of Europe is threatened, that's ultimately a challenge for the NATO alliance. It's a threat to Canada's, the UK's, and allied interests. And so a moment for everybody to step up and to reinforce.
And this seems to be all around NATO's potential expansion, which Russia does not want it to expand to any ex-Soviet nations. Is it even possible for us to reach a political solution or compromise? And if so, what are the options, Doctor?
Well, the Russians have a rather curious revisionist reading of post-Cold War history in order to justify the positions that they are taking. In good Russian fashion, of course, they don't want to recognize the sovereignty of independent states. They would rather keep everybody as vassal states, as we see in Belarus, in Georgia, and in Ukraine. And the Russians are trying to cut out the Europeans of negotiations, trying to have these bilateral negotiations with the United States, which I think is highly unfortunate that the Americans are buying into this idea of negotiating the future of Europe directly with the Russians rather than with the Europeans. Russia keeps violating basic premises of international law. It negotiates outside of its obligations of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. So I'm not optimistic that Russia really has a commitment to a diplomatic solution, except for trying to extort some sort of concessions from the United States.
All right, Dr. Leuprecht, a little over a minute left here, but moving to Canada, yesterday Justin Trudeau refused to answer any questions about Canada sending weapons to Ukraine or extending the Canadian training mission there. So why the secrecy around this when Ukraine is actually asking Canada to do these things?
Well, you want to keep your options open. On the one hand, you don't want to antagonize the Russians and pour fuel on the fire. On the other hand, this is a highly dynamic situation, and Canada in these sorts of situations will draft behind its allies, in particular the United States, also to some extent the UK, but also its European allies. And so I think it's looking for what the trajectory is that its partners and allies are taking in that regard before making a commitment.
All right, just about 30 seconds left here, Dr. Luprecht, but this may be an unfair question, perhaps. What is the likelihood of a large-scale conflict?
So on the one hand, people seem to think that you can contain this conflict to Ukraine and that we can manage spillover effects. I personally think that's delusional. Anytime you have a conflict in continental Europe, there are serious risks of unintended consequences, spillover effects, people misinterpreting intentions and signals. And we never know also to what extent Vladimir Putin has other Eastern European countries in his crosshairs, for instance, the Baltic states that remain highly vulnerable.
Canada has unveiled the lineup for the Olympic men's hockey team. While there aren't any current NHL stars on the team, there are NHL veterans, as well as professionals playing in North America, Europe, and Russia. 37-year-old Eric Stahl and 18-year-old Mason McTavish are two centers bookending the 25-man roster for the Beijing Games. Mr. Stahl won a gold medal 12 years ago in Vancouver, a month after Mr. McTavish turned 7 years old. As the Omicron variant continues to strain Canadian hospitals, a vaccine hesitancy expert is voicing concern about the slow vaccination rate of children between the ages of 5 and 11. In the 2 months since the approval of child-sized doses of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine, only 51% of children in that age group have had at least one dose. That's compared to more than 72% of 12 to 17-year-olds in the 2 months following the approval for that age range. Turning to Alberta, where the chief paramedic for health services says a number of changes are being made. This to ensure ambulances are available as the health system continues to face strain from COVID-19. Darren Sandbeck says measures include transferring more non-emergency, low-priority calls to other aid agencies and responding only to car accidents in which injuries have been reported. In Saskatchewan, a plan by the Regina Police Service to buy a plane is getting more money to help it get off the ground. The police service received approval during city budget deliberations last month to spend $1.2 million to buy and equip the aircraft. In a media release today, the Saskatchewan government says it is giving $300,000 to Regina Police to pay for a camera that would allow for advanced imaging, real-time video, infrared spotting, and night vision. The Saskatoon Police Service is getting more than $37,000 for a lab and 2 years of licensing to do advanced digital forensic analysis. Well, meantime, efforts are still underway to identify 4 family members who died at the edge of Manitoba's border with the U.S. Indo-Canadian community leaders say they have been fielding phone calls from people in India. They are fearful that the 4 found frozen to death in a field near Emerson last week are their missing relatives. One man in India told the Canadian press that 4 of his relatives, a man and woman in their 30s, a teen girl, and a young boy, left for Canada about 10 days ago. A Florida man is charged with human smuggling, and a U.S. judge agreed yesterday to release him on an appearance bond. Well, it looks like Ontario is following the lead of other provinces in signing on to the federal government's affordable child care program. Premier Doug Ford has told a Kenora radio station that the province is very close to signing a deal. Ontario is the only province or territory that hasn't agreed to the program, which promises to eventually lower the cost of childcare to $10 a day. Yesterday, Ontario's education minister said the province is pushing for more money than the $10.2 billion that Ottawa is offering. This is because Ontario families pay some of the highest prices in the country for childcare. Montreal's Felix Auger-Aliassime looks to continue his Australian Open run. He takes on second seed Daniil Medvedev in a quarterfinal that starts early tomorrow morning. The pair faced each other in the semifinals of last year's U.S. Open, with the Canadian losing to the Russian in straight sets. Turning to the east now, where Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston says the Atlantic premiers are united in their support of the proposed $5 billion Atlantic Loop clean energy project. Mr. Houston hosted a virtual meeting with Newfoundland and Labrador's Andrew Furey, PEI Premier Dennis King, and New Brunswick's Blaine Higgs this morning. The premiers also discussed immigration, labor shortages, and the pandemic. Meanwhile, the Nova Scotia government is making a piece of land in downtown Dartmouth available for a mixed-use project that includes affordable housing. Develop Nova Scotia is calling for development proposals on a 5,375 square meter parcel of land on King Street near the Alderney Ferry Terminal that is currently used as a parking lot. The invitation is open to housing developers, service providers, and other community organizations. The province has committed more than $35 million to create over 1,100 new affordable housing units. And good news in New Brunswick, where the RCMP say a missing 6-year-old boy who was the subject of an Amber Alert has been found safe. Police say the boy was allegedly taken by his mother from his home in Miramichi. The child and his mother were found safe in the Whitney area of New Brunswick. The Mounties say they have a 33-year-old woman in custody. All right, we'll be right back after the break with a look at stories from around the world. We'll have more on the IMF, soccer tragedies in Cameroon, and an investigation into the British Prime Minister's parties. So stay with us. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. We'll see you shortly. The International Monetary Fund's outlook for the world economy seems to have shrunk. It is downgrading its forecast and is now predicting the economy will expand by 4.4% this year. That's down from its previous estimate of 4.9%. The IMF is blaming the spread of the Omicron variant, higher energy prices, rising inflation, and financial strains in China. It has downgraded its forecast for Canadian economic growth this year as well to 3.3%. That's down from the previous outlook of 4.1%. In Cameroon, the death toll has risen to 8 following a stadium crush outside a game at the African Cup of Nations. Authorities say another 7 people are in serious condition in the hospital. A total of 38 were injured at the soccer tournament. The stampede happened on Monday night as soccer fans struggled to get into a stadium in the capital city of Yaoundé. The witnesses say that the problem started when security officials directed fans toward an entrance gate that was locked, and people started to get crushed and trampled. Turning to the UK now, where London police say they are investigating Downing Street parties in 2020 to determine if government officials violated coronavirus lockdown restrictions. Commissioner Cressida Dick told the London Assembly that the Metropolitan Police Service had launched an inquiry into a number of events at Downing Street. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing calls to resign. This comes amid revelations that he and his staff attended several parties in 2020 when most social gatherings were banned throughout England. Meanwhile, Lebanon continues to face an economic collapse as the World Bank says the country's political class is to blame. It warns that the meltdown threatens Beirut's long-term stability. The bank's Lebanon Economic Monitor on Tuesday released an analysis saying Lebanon's gross domestic product plummeted from close to $52 billion in 2019 to a projected $21.8 billion in 2021. That's a more than 58% contraction, the highest of a list of 193 countries. In the Sahel region of Africa, hundreds of people have marched through the streets of Burkina Faso's capital. This in a show of support for the new military-led junta. The junta ousted democratically elected President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore and seized control of the country on Monday. This was when more than a dozen soldiers on state media declared that their new movement, the Patriotic Movement for Safeguarding and Restoration, was in charge. The junta closed the borders, imposed a curfew, suspended the constitution, and dissolved the government and the parliament. Saudi Arabia has ordered the restoration of full diplomatic ties with Thailand after 3 decades of mistrust and hostility. Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha arrived in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to signal an effort to bury the hatchet between the nations. The meeting came after Saudi Arabia downgraded its diplomatic ties with Thailand over the 1989 theft known as the Blue Diamond Affair. A Thai janitor's theft of an estimated $20 million worth of gems and jewelry from a Saudi prince's palace caused a scandal that wrecked relations between the countries. Widespread power outages have been reported in the Central Asian countries of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. It wasn't immediately clear what caused the outages. The three former Soviet nations are part of one power system that was designed in the Soviet times. Well, turning to a recent study on vaccination concerns, an American study of more than 2,100 women has shown no association between COVID-19 vaccination status and infection and fertility and pregnancy. Researchers from the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City gave participants questionnaires about demographic information, social factors, partners' information, and COVID vaccine and infection status. The results showed that being vaccinated or having been infected with COVID-19 has not been associated with any short-term changes in the probability of conception. Parts of Turkey and Greece are trying to dig through massive snowstorms. Crews in Istanbul are trying to clear highways and roads buried under up to 80 centimeters of snow. Stranded motorists either spent the night in cars, abandoned their vehicles to walk home, or crowded into subways and other public transportation. Crews in Athens are still trying to free about 250 drivers trapped on a major highway that runs across the city. The army was sent overnight to deliver food and water to vehicles and to help free as many as possible. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca. All right, take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.